Hey everyone, welcome to another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today we're going to be talking about something that I think a lot of people are interested in, and it's meditation, and specifically how to talk about meditation in English.
That's right.
I find this so fascinating because, on the one hand, like meditation is this thing that's about like going inward and being silent.
Right.
But on the other hand, like if you're interested in meditation, you probably want to like connect with other people,
Yeah.
talk about meditation,
Absolutely.
share your experiences,
Yeah.
and, maybe learn from other people's experiences as well.
Yeah, I think that's such a key point because, meditation, it can be a very personal practice.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be a solitary one.
Right.
And especially in today's world, with the internet and social media,
Yeah.
there are so many opportunities to connect with people from all over the globe who share this interest in meditation. And often English is like the common language that we can use to kind of bridge those gaps.
I totally agree. And I've had some really amazing conversations online with people from like, different countries, different backgrounds.
Absolutely.
All about meditation. And it's been so enriching to like see how other people approach it.
Yeah.
And to learn from their perspectives.
Yeah.
So I think it's really valuable to have the language to be able to talk about this in a way that other people will understand.
Absolutely. And, even beyond just connecting with others online,
Yeah.
think about, if you're trying to explain the benefits of mindfulness to a colleague
Right.
who's maybe feeling stressed out, or if you're seeking advice from a teacher or mentor who lives in another country, being able to express yourself clearly and accurately in English can really make a difference.
Yeah. So where do we even begin? Is there like a secret meditation dictionary
Right.
you need to memorize?
Well, not exactly a secret dictionary,
Okay.
but there are definitely some key terms and phrases that are really helpful to know. And I think one of the best places to start is with the word mindfulness itself.
Okay. Yeah. Mindfulness, that's kind of like the buzzword of the moment. But like, what does it actually mean?
Yeah, it's one of those words that gets thrown around a lot.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people have different understandings of what it means.
Yeah.
But at its core, mindfulness is really about paying attention to the present moment.
Okay.
Without judgment. So it's not just about, being aware of your surroundings, but it's also about being aware of your thoughts, your feelings, your bodily sensations, and just kind of observing them without getting carried away by them.
So it's like being a fly on the wall.
Yes.
In your own mind. Like you're just observing without getting too involved.
Okay. Yeah, I can see that. And I think that's something that I've definitely experienced in my own meditation practice, is that when you first start meditating, it's so easy to get caught up in those thoughts. Like, oh, I got to do this. And
I got to do that. And
your to-do list just starts.
Yeah, exactly. And then
exploding in your mind.
You get frustrated because you're like, I'm supposed to be meditating.
Right.
And I'm thinking about all this stuff.
But that's the thing. Mindfulness is not about stopping those thoughts from arising.
Right.
It's about noticing them and then gently bringing your attention back to the present moment.
Okay.
Whatever that might be for you.
And that present moment could be like your breath, or it could be like a mantra.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Any kind of anchor that you choose to focus on.
Okay, so mindfulness is about being present, but what about focus? They seem kind of similar.
Yeah, they are related, for sure.
Okay.
I think the way I would distinguish them is that focus is more about directing your attention to a specific point.
Okay.
So whether that's your breath, a mantra, a physical sensation, it's about really honing in on that one thing and trying to maintain your attention on it.
So it's like training a muscle.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a mental muscle that you can strengthen with practice.
Yeah, I like that. And I've definitely noticed that the more I meditate, the easier it is for me to focus in other areas of my life.
Absolutely.
Like at work.
Yeah.
When I'm reading a book, or even just having a conversation.
That's one of the amazing things about meditation, is that it's not just about what happens on the cushion, but it really can spill over into all areas of your life.
Totally.
Yeah.
So we've talked about mindfulness and focus. What about breath work? I've heard that term a lot lately.
Yeah, breath work is becoming increasingly popular.
Yeah. But I'm not sure I fully understand what it is.
Yeah, so breath work is basically any kind of practice that involves consciously manipulating your breath to influence your physical, mental, or emotional state.
Okay.
So it's more than just taking a few deep breaths.
Right.
It's really about using the breath as a tool to kind of shift your state of being.
Okay. And are there different types of breath work?
Oh, yeah. There's a huge variety of breathwork techniques.
Okay.
Some are very simple, like just counting your breaths.
Yeah.
Others involve more complex visualizations,
Okay.
or even holding your breath for certain periods of time.
Wow. So it's like using your breath as a bridge between your body and mind.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. The breath is such a powerful connector between the physical and the mental.
Okay, so we've covered mindfulness-focused breath work.
Yeah.
Anything else that we need to add to our meditation vocabulary?
Well, I think one more important term is guided meditation.
Okay, and I've got to admit, I love guided meditations.
Yeah.
It's like having a personal trainer for your mind.
Totally.
Especially when I was first getting started with meditation, I found them so helpful.
Yeah, guided meditations are great because they provide structure and support.
Yeah.
Especially if you're new to meditation or if you find it challenging to stay focused on your own.
Yeah, I used to think that like real meditators only did silent meditation. But then I realized that like guided meditations can be just as powerful.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's no shame in using them.
Not at all. In fact, many experienced meditators still use guided meditations from time to time.
So what are some of the benefits of guided meditations?
Well, I think one of the main benefits is that they can help you to learn different techniques.
Okay.
So whether you're interested in mindfulness, breath work, loving kindness, there's probably a guided meditation out there for you.
Yeah, and there's so many different voices and styles too.
Yeah.
So you can find someone who really resonates with you.
Exactly.
Okay. So we've covered mindfulness focus, breath work, and guided meditations. Is there anything else we should be aware of when we're talking about meditation in English?
Well, I think the last thing we should touch on is the concept of mantras.
Okay, mantras. Yeah, I've heard of those, but I've never really used them in my own practice.
Yeah, so a mantra is basically a word or sound that you repeat silently or aloud during meditation, and it can act as an anchor for your mind to help you focus and to quiet the mental chatter.
So it's like a mental tool to help you stay present.
Exactly.
Okay, I can see that. And are there different types of mantras?
Yeah, there are many different mantras.
Okay.
Some are in Sanskrit, some are in English, some are just sounds.
Yeah.
And you can choose one that resonates with you.
Okay.
Or that aligns with your intention for your meditation practice.
Okay, so we've learned some key vocabulary now. How do we actually use these words to talk about our own meditation practice or experiences?
Right. Well, that's what we're going to be talking about in the next part of our deep dive.
Amazing. I'm excited to learn more.
Yeah, me too. This is going to be fun.
All right, so stay tuned, everyone. We'll be right back after a short break. Okay, so we've got like our meditation dictionary down, mindfulness focus, breathwork mantras. We're practically fluent in meditation lingo now.
Right,
But how do we actually use all this knowledge to talk about our experiences in like real life conversations?
Yeah, that's a great question because, you know, it's one thing to understand these concepts, but it's another thing to be able to articulate them in a way that other people can understand.
Right. And like, I don't want to sound like I'm giving a lecture every time someone asks me about meditation.
Yeah. Right? Nobody wants to be lectured at a cocktail party.
Exactly. So like, imagine you're at a dinner party.
Right.
And someone asks you like, oh, what do you do for stress relief?
Yeah, that's a classic.
What would you say?
Well, I think it's a great opportunity to introduce the topic of meditation.
Okay.
You know, you could say something like, well, I've been practicing mindfulness meditation for a while now.
Yeah.
And it's been really helpful in managing stress.
Okay, so you're not just saying like, I meditate.
Right.
You're actually using the term mindfulness.
Exactly. Because that gives them a little bit more context.
Okay.
And it also kind of signals that you've put some thought into this.
Right.
You're not just like a casual meditator.
Okay, I like that. And then what if they're like, oh, mindfulness meditation. What's that?
Yeah, then you can give them a brief explanation. You know, keep it simple.
Okay.
You could say something like, it's basically about paying attention to the present moment without judgment.
Okay.
I focus on my breath and it helps me calm my mind.
Yeah, that's a good one. And I think it's important to keep it relatable.
Absolutely.
You know, like people can connect with the idea of feeling stressed and wanting to find ways to calm down.
Right, because everyone experiences stress.
Exactly.
It's a universal human experience.
So it's like a common ground that you can build on.
Exactly.
Okay, so what if the conversation goes a little deeper and they start asking about like specific challenges that you face in your meditation practice?
Yeah, I think it's important to be honest and authentic.
Okay.
You know, don't try to pretend that you're some kind of meditation master.
Yeah.
If you're struggling with something, say it. You know, you could say something like, honestly, I find it really tough to quiet my mind. Sometimes thoughts keep popping up like notifications on my phone.
I love that analogy.
It's so true, though, right?
It is, yeah. It's like you're trying to meditate, and then all of a sudden it's like, bing.
Exact.
You got a new email.
Got a text message.
Yeah, then you get distracted, and you're like, oh, shoot, I'm supposed to be meditating.
Right, but that's normal.
Oh,
Everyone experiences distractions during meditation.
Okay, so it's not about, like, never having any distractions.
Yeah.
It's about learning to deal with them.
Exactly. It's about noticing them and then gently bringing your attention back to your breath or your mantra.
Okay, so what if someone wants to know more about the benefits that you've experienced from meditation?
Yeah, then you can share your personal story.
Okay.
You could say something like, since I started meditating, I've noticed that I'm able to sleep better.
Okay.
Or I'm less reactive to stress, or I'm more patient with my kids.
Yeah, those are great examples, and I think it's important to be specific.
Yeah.
Instead of just saying like, oh, it makes me feel better.
Right.
You can actually give concrete examples of how meditation has impacted your life.
Absolutely, because that makes it more believable and more relatable.
Okay, so what if someone asks you for advice on starting a meditation practice?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Like, how do you share your wisdom without sounding preachy?
Right.
Or like you're some kind of guru?
Yeah, I think humility is key.
Okay.
You can share your own experiences and offer suggestions.
Yeah.
But always emphasize that it's a personal journey. You could say something like, I'm still pretty new to this myself, but what's really helped me is finding a guided meditation app that I connect with.
Okay.
Or, maybe you could recommend a book or a teacher.
Yeah.
But just make it clear that you're not like the ultimate authority on meditation.
You're just sharing what's worked for you. Okay, that makes sense. So we've covered a lot of like positive scenarios, but what about those moments when conversations about meditation become like a little awkward?
Oh, yeah, those can be tricky.
Like what if someone dismisses it as like woo-woo?
Right.
Or just doesn't get it?
Yeah, I think in those situations, it's important to not take it personally.
Okay.
Not everyone is going to be receptive to the idea of meditation.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Okay, so how do you handle those situations gracefully?
Well, I think sometimes the best approach is simply to respect their perspective.
Okay.
And move on. You could say something like, I understand your skepticism. It's not for everyone.
Right.
But it's been a really positive experience for me.
Okay, and then just leave it at that.
Exactly. You don't need to try to convince them or convert them.
That's just going to make things more awkward.
Exactly.
Okay, what if someone starts comparing their meditation practice to yours?
Oh, yeah, the Meditation Olympics.
Yeah, and it feels kind of competitive.
Yeah, it's easy to fall into that trap. But remember, meditation is a personal practice.
Yeah.
There's no right or wrong way to do it.
Right.
So if someone starts boasting about, how long they meditate for or how advanced their technique is, just smile and nod. And then gently steer the conversation back to your own experience.
Okay, so it's not about like one-upping each other.
Right.
It's about sharing our own journeys.
Exactly.
Okay, and what about those moments when I just can't find the right words to describe what I'm feeling?
Yeah, that happens to all of us.
Yeah.
A language is a limited tool.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's just not adequate to express the depths of our experience.
Right.
So in those moments, it's okay to just say, it's hard to put into words, but it makes me feel. And then just try to describe the sensation or emotion.
Okay, so like you don't have to be a poet.
Right.
You could just be honest and say like, I don't know how to describe this, but this is what it feels like.
And sometimes just acknowledging the difficulty of expressing something can be more authentic than trying to force it.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
But there's one area that I'm still curious about.
It's okay.
You mentioned earlier that language can actually influence our meditation experience.
Yes.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. So this is where linguistics and mindfulness kind of intersect.
Okay.
The words that we use to describe our inner world can actually shape our perception of it.
Okay.
So, for example, if you're constantly telling yourself, I'm terrible at meditating, you're more likely to believe it.
Right.
And you're more likely to experience frustration and discouragement.
So it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Exactly.
Okay.
But the good news is that we can use language to our advantage.
Okay. How so?
By choosing words that are encouraging and empowering and aligned with our intentions, we can create a more positive and supportive inner dialogue.
So instead of saying like, I'm terrible at meditating, you could say like, I'm learning and I'm growing. Or I'm curious about what I'll discover today.
Yeah. Or even just, I'm here,
right.
acknowledging your presence.
Okay. So it's about being mindful of the language that we use.
Yes.
Both internally and externally.
Exactly.
When we're talking about meditation,
yeah,
I'm starting to see how all of this goes beyond just sounding knowledgeable.
Yeah.
It's about using language as a tool.
Right.
For deeper understanding, connection, and personal growth.
Absolutely. That's the heart of it.
Okay, well, this has been incredibly insightful. I'm really glad we had this conversation.
Me too. I think it's important to talk about these things.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we have a lot more to explore.
We do.
In terms of like cultural sensitivity and thoughtful communication around meditation.
Absolutely.
So stay tuned, everyone. We'll be right back after a short break. Okay, so we're back. And, we've been talking about how to talk about meditation in English.
Yeah.
And I feel like we've covered a lot of ground.
Right.
Like basic vocabulary, how to have conversations with people about meditation.
Yeah.
But you mentioned earlier that there are some like potentially sensitive areas that we should be aware of.
Yeah, that's an important point because, as meditation becomes more and more popular and as more people from different cultures and backgrounds are getting interested in it.
Yeah.
I think it's really important to be mindful of the language that we use and to make sure that we're not appropriating or misrepresenting any traditions or practices.
So it's not just about knowing the right words, but it's also about being sensitive to the context.
Exactly.
And the potential impact of our words.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, so can you give us some examples of like specific things that we should be careful about?
Yeah, sure. So one thing that comes to mind is discussing specific meditation techniques.
Okay.
There are so many different techniques out there, and some of them are very deeply rooted in specific cultures or traditions.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important to approach those conversations with humility and respect, and to acknowledge that our understanding might be limited.
So like if someone mentions practicing Vipassana, which I know is like a specific type of medication.
Yeah.
I shouldn't just assume that I know what that means.
Exactly, because, Vipassana has a very specific meaning.
Right.
And a very specific history and lineage.
Yeah.
And so if you're not familiar with it, I think it's best to just ask.
Okay.
Say something like, I'm not familiar with that technique. Could you tell me more about it?
Okay, so it's about being curious and open.
Yeah.
Rather than trying to sound like an expert.
Exactly.
Okay, what else?
Well, I think another thing to be mindful of is our own biases and assumptions.
Okay.
We all have them.
Yeah.
And they can unconsciously influence the way that we talk about meditation.
So like, for example, if I have a bias against like certain spiritual traditions.
Right.
That might come out in the way that I talk about meditation.
Exactly. Or if you have a very strong preference for a particular technique, you might unintentionally dismiss or devalue other techniques.
Okay, so it's important to be aware of those biases.
Yeah.
And to try to set them aside.
Right.
When we're having these conversations.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about being respectful of different traditions and being aware of our own biases.
Yeah.
Are there any other tips that you would give for having like sensitive and thoughtful conversations about meditation?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things is to just listen.
Okay.
Really listen to what the other person is saying.
Yeah.
Without interrupting or trying to impose your own views.
Right.
And to create a space where they feel safe to share their experiences without feeling judged or criticized.
No, it's about creating a sense of trust and connection.
Exactly.
Okay, I like that. And I think that's something that we can all strive for.
Absolutely.
Not just in conversations about meditation, but in all of our interactions.
Yeah.
Well, this has been such an insightful conversation. I'm so glad we had this deep dive today.
Me too.
And I feel like I've learned a lot about how to talk about meditation in English.
Yeah.
But also about how to be more mindful and respectful in my communication in general.
That's great to hear.
So to our listeners out there, I hope you found this helpful, and I encourage you to keep exploring the world of meditation.
Yeah.
Keep learning and keep those conversations flowing.
Absolutely.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone.